So good afternoon. My name's Susanna Marcucci. I'm the NAFSA Region 11 Central and Western Massachusetts State Representative. I'm facilitating this session today. So we're here with another great session, very timely. It seems like a day doesn't go by when something doesn't happen in the political space. So this is Advocacy, You Matter, Your Voice Matters. We have a fabulous panel with us, Aileen Lachs, who's a caseworker in the office of United States Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont. We have Elizabeth Goss, who's an attorney with the law offices of Goss and Associates and very involved in our region. And we have Erica Stewart coming from NAFSA headquarters in DC. She's the Director of Advocacy and Media Outreach for NAFSA, and this discussion will be moderated by Andrew Shiatani, who's the Director of the International Center at Tufts University. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple of Zoom tips. If you're able to, it would be great if you could share your video so our panelists can see your faces and make this feel as conversational as possible. If you could go ahead and change your name with your name, your pronouns, and institution, that would be wonderful. Please keep yourself muted the whole time. We'll be taking questions, but through the chat at the end. And feel free to use the chat throughout the session to ask questions. I know our panelists will be sharing some resource links in the chat, so really make use of that. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to start the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Thank you, and welcome everybody to a session on a really exciting and important topic. And I will add to Susanna's recommendations that if you are going live, we hope that you'll join us in a live video. Feel free to choose a background that makes you feel peaceful and calm and comfortable. I think we all need in this very turbulent time to choose whatever techniques and tricks we have available to us to make sure that we are maintaining our equilibrium through challenging and turbulent times. So again, my name is Andy Shiotani. I'm the director of the Tufts International Center, and I'm really thrilled to be joined by a really great set of panelists today to talk about the issue of advocacy. And I suspect that many of you are here today because you're looking at the current environment, looking at all of the policy changes that are going on, the political turbulence, the cultural turbulence that we're all seeing and experiencing firsthand, and I'm sure, and wondering, what is my role? How do I find my voice? How do I articulate arguments, interests, ideas that I think are important to the field, to the profession, to my office, to my team, and to the students and scholars that we serve. So I just want to acknowledge that we are in the advocacy climate is certainly energized. It's certainly really highlighted, the recent events have really highlighted how much advocacy is needed. We want to remind through this session and remind everybody that there are opportunities to articulate your views, to find your voice on the issues that matter to you, whether they're small or large. Change is coming at such a rapid clip that we all have to find ways to be measured in what we can do. But we all are motivated by the impulse of of doing something, of finding ways to make change for the better. So I want to take a brief moment to invite everybody to put into the chat room your answer to this question. Of course, it's completely voluntary, but what is motivating your interest in advocacy at the moment? What are the issues, or why, maybe you don't have a specific driving issue, but what is motivating you to come to a session like this? And what are the concerns that are driving your interest in this topic? So if we'll take 30 seconds and you want to put something in the chat room, that would be great. Feels like a constant assault on our field. Anybody else want to put? Okay, so I encourage people to just go ahead and put something in the chat room as we continue to talk. And we will develop ideas as we go along about how we can be effective in advocacy. So let us continue. So we're interested in advocacy, that, you know, it's not something that we are, well, of course, we're interested in the developments of the moment, but it's something that we might think about as something we need to do on an ongoing basis, not only in particular times, but throughout our professions, throughout our field, throughout our ongoing work with international students, with international scholars, with our colleagues, with our co-workers. So it's an ongoing necessity and part of the DNA of what we do as international higher education professionals and as concerned members of the public. So advocacy has multiple opportunities. There are multiple ways in which advocacy might become part of our work, again, because of the current climate, but as we proceed through changing times, how can we incorporate advocacy into our everyday work, our everyday lives? So hopefully we'll get some insights and discuss this issue a little bit and see where advocacy fits into what we do, whether it's, again, because we have a crisis going on, or in more normal or regular times, how can advocacy fit into the work that we do? So we're going to provide an understanding, or hopefully help you develop an understanding of how advocacy appears and emerges in the different contexts of work. And our panelists come from a variety of professional backgrounds and fields, from the legal field, from government, and specifically from Congress, from nonprofit organizations, and from organizations in higher education as represented by NAFSA. So let's proceed on to talk to our panelists about what their thoughts are. And I want to introduce our panel. You've already been introduced to Liz, Aileen, and Erica. And I'm going to turn to each of them first to have them introduce themselves, give us a little bit of a sense of their background and how they got involved in the work that they do and where they are seeing opportunities for advocacy. So I'm going to invite Liz Goss from Goss Associates to talk to us about her field. And Liz, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So I know many of you know me. I've been a NAFSA for many, many years now, about 28 years to be exact. I started in the field as an international student scholar advisor and director at Tufts Health Sciences Center. Went to law school at night and have been practicing law since 2000. So since 1999, 2000. And during that time, I would say advocacy has always had there's always been a thread of advocacy throughout the course of my entire professional career. And any of you who have progressed in this career know, we've been through many challenges over the last 28 years, from 2 World Trade Center bombings, regulations, NCERS, CVIS, going from a paper-based system to an electronic-based system. I mean, all along in the development of this career, there have been places where we've all had, we've had little bits and pieces of advocacy. So I think advocacy is just part of at least from my experience, it's always been a part of the profession. And also, it's interesting, as I was thinking about this session, I was thinking about my mentors in the field, and it's a little bit of back to the future for me, because as I said, I started in the early 90s, and one of my biggest mentors was Adam Green. And in my conversation with Adam Green, he's an immigration attorney. For those of you who don't know Adam, he's on the West Coast, but for many years, he's on the East Coast here in Boston with us. And he reminded me in 1993, when the Government Regulatory Affairs Committee, the GRAC system, was in place across the nation. There was a few, Catherine Cotton, Sharon Ladd, Kathy Steiner Lang. So many of the giants in our field were in this organization. They pushed NAFSA and Amy Yankin to get a meeting with somebody in the White House in 1993 to discuss the ACWIA wages, to split wages from general industry wages, because there was a huge issue of wage inflation and H-1B visa processing. And so it was a ground, we have to, it was from the ground up that there was a push to get Amy Inkin, who was then, the system was different then, but the bottom line is it was the NAFSAs themselves who pushed for the organization to get a meeting with the White House. And they were the ones to, have the conversation about splitting the acquia fees from the regular industry fees. And so, that, if you think about what's happening today, that's a parallel. And for sure, circumstances are not the same. Could we get a meeting in the White House today just by, pushing our organization to make that happen? No. In 1993, it was possible. Now, we know that's not the way things work, but there are opportunities. And I think it's kind of grounding to know that we've been here before and we will get through this together moving forward.
Thanks so much, Liz. That's a really important point, to have that historical perspective that even though the context has changed, there have been different opportunities for people to get involved in different ways. And that change does matter. It does happen when people work together. Again, the situations might vary, the actors might vary, the political climate might vary, but those important changes that have happened through immigration attorneys, through higher education professionals, for faculty, students getting together, motivating positive change. Those reference points are really important to keep in mind, because I'm noticing from the comments, many of us are quite understandably afflicted by a sense of real despair and real anxiety that there will be no change, that this is, the changes that are happening are going to be negative and decisively so. But yet, again, even in very difficult institutional and political environments, people have been able to secure important victories for their students and scholars and for their institutions. So thank you for that. So we are going to now turn to Aileen Lachs from Senator Patrick Leahy's office. And I'm going to have you talk a little bit about the work you do, because that's a little bit unique. And I know that one of the impulses that we all have, when we're trying to advocate for a particular individual or a particular set of policies or for legislation, is to write or call to our senator or our representative or both. But your role in Senator Leahy's office is a little interesting, unique and interesting. So I thought it would be really helpful for us to hear what you do and how it connects to the themes of advocacy.
Well, thank you, Andy, and thank you really to all of you at NAFSA. A special shout out to Jessa Karki at NAFSA Vermont, who reached out to me initially, and also participating today is Polly Major from Senator Leahy's office, who's been extremely instrumental in assisting me today, and also Senator Leahy's intern Maria Rosso. So just wanted to acknowledge them. So my background is kind of not the opposite as Liz, but a nice contrast. I, like Liz, am an attorney, and I practiced law for about 25 years. However, I didn't practice in the immigration field at all. I practiced in sort of general civil context in a firm in Burlington, Vermont, and came to Senator Patrick Leahy's office on the 1st of November of this year. So I am approaching the 1-year mark, and I have no historical context to assure you of this, but my sense is that this has been a very unique year, both in the context of the Senate as well as in the context of immigration. It's been a little bit of an advantage for me because there was such an uphill learning curve to learn everything that you all know from being in this field for years and years. But since every 10 minutes there's a new tweet and there's a new presidential proclamation, the advantage for me was that I didn't have to unlearn what I already knew. I just had to start learning, every 10 minutes something new. So needless to say, it's been very dynamic, very fascinating, extremely rewarding. to feel part of something, so important, and particularly at this time, is, just means a great deal to me personally. In terms, just want to touch also on introducing Senator Patrick Leahy. For those of you who may not know him, if you're in the state of Vermont, you most assuredly do. But Senator Leahy has been in the Senate since 1974. So he ranks first in seniority in the Senate, which is very, very significant for the state of Vermont. And he's on the Appropriations Committee, Judiciary, Agriculture, other committees. So you may have of late through the SCOTUS hearings seen him live in that capacity. And Senator Leahy has been a longtime advocate on the immigration issues, whether it be refugee, asylee, DACA, federal detention facilities, and particularly in light of COVID, health and safety concerns and issues. And then most notably for this group in the education field, very recently involved with both the most recently proposed DHS rule to limit the time in the country for students, as well as the DOS, the Department of State guidance that came down recently. So Senator Leahy, and this is materials that will be distributed to you later on, so you can see Senator Leahy's involvement. And I'm mentioning these in particular, not only because they're education related, but because they really fit into the discussion of advocacy in terms of how the process of how Senator Leahy became involved in some of these issues and became involved, took a stance in terms of these letters with other senators to speak out on these issues of importance to educational institutions and constituents in Vermont. So I think they serve, we'll talk a little bit later in detail, but they serve as really excellent examples of the role advocacy, the way advocacy can play out within a congressional office, particularly in the education field. So my work at the Senator's office is as an immigration caseworker. And I would think that perhaps many of you have already reached out to and worked with your congressional delegation to do casework, but I am not certain. I'd be interested to hear if you're would like to put information in the chat or otherwise share what has worked for you all, ways in which you've interfaced with your senator's office. That would be very much of interest. From Senator Leahy's perspective and the Senator Leahy's office, hearing from constituents and constituent voices is extremely important. Senator Leahy's longtime Vermonter, and the voices of Vermont constituents, the impact on Vermont constituents of legislation or concerns, issues is just vitally important. So the caseworker work, the services really connect to that larger picture of advocacy, which we can talk about a little bit later, and play, I think, a very, very important role in terms of building relationships and serving that larger, more macro level. The casework itself, just a quick kind of overview of the who, what, where, when, how, why, is focused on assisting any and all constituents, no matter what their background, no matter what their political persuasion, and assisting them with a particular issue. But in some instances, it's more than just one constituent. It can be an educational institution. We've worked many times with students and professors. And so the goal is really to understand what the issue is for that constituent and then try to address it as best we can. The key to constituent work is that, and this is really goes to the what and how, is that each congressional office has liaisons in all federal governmental agencies and departments. And this means that we have the ability to reach out to those agencies and departments to make inquiries. And that would be either on a specific basis or on a general basis. So it could be about a specific student who's trying to get a visa to come to the United States to study, but isn't able to get an interview, or the interview is so much later than they're going to miss their semester of training. It could be a professor who's wanting or needing to attend a conference in another country and can't travel for various immigration reasons. So we may be following up with an inquiry to these different departments and agencies on a specific basis to help that, understand what's stuck and what's happening in that particular case. Or it might be on a more general basis to understand better what the criteria is for, let's say, a national interest exception to the various presidential proclamations that we've all been familiar with recently. So I think one important theme or concept is that we can't weigh in on the substantive determination or adjudication, but we really can, I think, in many instances, be helpful on the process side. And so when a case is stuck, when there's a concern about delays, I think our office and other congressional offices can be very helpful in shining a light on that particular case and on that particular issue, and trying to see what is at issue there that we might be able to help kind of move the case forward. Yeah, and just within very recent months, quite a few caseworker cases coming from professors, students, attorneys, educational institutions, and really it doesn't matter who it is that contacts our office. We're here to do whatever we can to assist with those constituent concerns. And in addition to the sort of inquiries, the office, I think, can also be very helpful in providing just overall information and contacts to help constituents to find the information they need and to sort of further their own goals and advocate on their own behalf, and also perhaps making referrals to other organizations or institutions. And then, as we'll talk, I think, later on, in terms of the role of the advocacy and sort of the micro-macro connection, we would also be working collaboratively as caseworkers with other people part of Senator Leahy's DC staff or Vermont staff, and working collaboratively with the other Vermont delegation members and other members within the Senate or House. So there really is a very strong network and collaboration connection in many instances. So it really doesn't matter which door you enter into. We're really interested in hearing from you at Senator Leahy's office, and we can connect you with the other people within Senator Leahy's office, for example, where that would serve best. But I think the caseworker piece is a very excellent door to enter, because I think with casework, it's more accessible in many instances than perhaps other aspects of a congressional office. So very much encouraging people to reach out whenever they may have an issue or a concern that we might be able to assist with. Andy, I think you're muted.
Rookie mistake with Zoom again. 6 months in and I still haven't learned. So I was just going to say, though, that the advocacy work or the effects that might happen when an individual case comes to the attention of a caseworker can have those larger advocacy effects, in the sense that you see issues coming up, it goes along your network of connections and enters into the policy stream. So we can have a multiple, so just thinking of advocating for a single person or advocating for a single case may, again, have those larger effects of introducing policy discussions and changes in opinions. So thank you so much. Now, we're going to turn to Erica Stewart. One of the things about this session that really thrilled me was I got to meet Erica. Well, I was going to say I got to meet Erica in the flesh, but that's not quite true, virtually. So we know Erica. If you're a NAFSA member, we know her from her communications and messages and her involvement and engagement with us. So Erica, could you talk a little bit about your role and where advocacy fits into NAFSA and NAFSA strategies?
Excellent. Happy to, Andy. Thank you for that kind introduction. And I want to give a shout out to Amanda Connolly for first reaching out to me with this opportunity. It's really a thrill to connect with folks in the field who really are the engine that drives NAFSA's advocacy work. So like Aileen, I am celebrating about my 1-year anniversary here at NAFSA. So prior to that, I have worked in communications for community development and international development organizations. So the common thread that has run throughout is really my passion for creating messages, excuse me, that motivate people to get involved. And I have a wonderful team at NAFSA in our public policy shop that feeds me with sort of an analysis of the policies that are impacting our field. And then it's my job to sort of distill those into messages and tactics and the timing that means we can mobilize our advocates at the right time with the most compelling messages and put them in the right mailboxes, to use a general phrase. So what that has meant for me on a practical level is that hopefully you've heard from me through our Connecting Our World email updates, which about every Thursday, we connect with the field through a short, succinct update of sort of what's popping. And as we have already heard, a lot has been popping. And that becomes sort of an easy way for advocates in the field to understand what are we flagging and what can we do about it. You also, I'm sure, remember the joy that was the SEVP guidance in July, which threatened international students with deportation if their higher ed institution was going to virtual only instruction. And that was another example of where I took my regulatory practice expertise of my colleagues and the public policy expertise of my public policy colleagues and quickly turned that into advocacy actions that you folks could take. And we try to make them easy. I know it's time consuming. I know there's a ton on your plate, but we are so gratified to see so many of you are making the time for this. And it is just, I can't say enough how it's easy to feel cynical in this climate. And Andy talked about the multiple areas of political and cultural turbulence, and prioritizing this, I know, is a big ask. And I'll talk a little later about how we can sort of break that into bite-sized pieces. But the other thing I should say is NAFSA is a nonpartisan organization. So we won't be out there giving you talking points to spread about why this candidate should get your vote and why this one shouldn't. I mean, obviously, it's pretty clear right now what we'd like to see happen in the next administration. But of course, as a 501c3, we are limited in influencing the electorate. So we keep our tone pretty factual and broadly in support of policies that make our world a more peaceful and globally connected place, and specifically how policies can make international students feel more welcome here and how we can expand the participation and the diversity of study abroad participants. So you'll be hearing more about what exactly you can do later.
Right, and we'll get that opportunity, yes, from Erica for you to give us more pointers on how we can get connected and involved. So we are going to transition now to a brief panel discussion, but I want to invite all of you to start putting into the chat room questions that you may have for our presenters. So we have a wealth of experience on our panel, and we'd love to hear from you, questions, small and large, whether they're specific or general. Please enter your questions into the chat room so we can have a really robust discussion in the second half of today's session. So while you're going ahead with your questions, let me just start off with a couple of observations that I just wanted to add to what Liz, Aileen, and Erica have mentioned. And it's from my perspective as a director of an international office responsible for immigration services for students and scholars, as well as responsible for promoting a campus environment that is really culturally welcoming, that is supportive, and that is, in general, just an important part of engaging with the mission and the values of the institution in providing an educational experience, an academic experience that genuinely reflects world values, our interest in becoming educators for citizens of this world and not just particular countries or particular peoples. So as an International Center Director, through this session and through the events that have unfolded, I've just realized that advocacy, my own shift in thinking in the 20 years that I've been in international education, I've shifted over time and thinking of advocacy as some kind of a special thing that one does. And obviously there are special situations where there are individual cases, individual people who we need to advocate for. There are policies that we want to advocate for or advocate against, as it were, that are very specific, that are very sort of notable. But as I thought about this a little bit more, in terms of the international office, I tend to think now that advocacy also has to be part of your organizational blueprint, your organizational DNA. So it's not just something you do on a special occasion, but it's something where the office needs to be prepared to do advocacy in multiple directions. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, one of the things that's become apparent in recent weeks, recent months, really, and over the last few years, in all honesty, is that the international office really needs to up its data game. So advocacy often requires numbers, it requires stories, it requires people to give a human face to the issues and how they impact real human beings, and how they impact the institution, how they impact the field as a whole. So really being prepared with your numbers and with your data and with those connections that allow you to mobilize people to support a particular policy or a program, and to articulate those voices and articulate those ideas and opinions and views. And so that's something that, I just think that international offices might need to consider. How do we up our data game in that sense? Again, not only the quantitative data, but the qualitative data as well. And so that it's not something that we have to drop everything and collect that information for a special situation, but we can mobilize that information really quickly and effectively and accurately, so that we can give our partners, our university leadership, our congressional representatives, that really good information that accurately reflects the picture on the ground, how it impacts real people. So that is one thing that we're looking to think about, how we can improve our data game, our ability to connect numbers and people to the issues at hand. A lot of the advocacy work that I do and that our center does, I just realized that it's not only outward facing in the sense that we're contacting our congressional representatives, we're contacting our governor's offices, we're contacting NAFSA, but a lot of the advocacy we have to do is internal to our organizations and to our entities. So at Tufts, I'm very fortunate to work at an institution that is very committed to global engagement, to the missions of international education, international study abroad, and just cross-cultural learning. But even with that in mind, the advocacy work that I often find that we need to do is directed towards educating even well-intentioned colleagues, even well-intentioned members of the leadership about the issues at hand, about the value that international students and scholars bring, about why they are absolutely worth the time and effort to write a letter, call a congressperson, call a senator, sign a petition, so write an email. So educating internally what the interests of our international students and scholars are and how to advocate for for them within the framework of your own organization or your own system. And so that internal advocacy work is really important. You know, the International Center at Tufts, we don't control housing, we don't control employment, we don't control human resources. So the work we do is to some extent with these units is real advocacy work. And just making that a framework in which you're working with your colleagues and partners to really advocate in really impactful ways with people who do make a difference in the lives of your students and scholars is really important. And then also, finally, I think one other thing that's come to my mind is the real importance of risk management. In other words, developing longer horizons and trying to see what are the opportunities and challenges that are going to be ahead for our international students and scholars. I think we're all doing that right now because of the nature of the environment we're in. And so that is something that we are, definitely looking at is, if we see dangers to our institution, to our current students and scholars, how can we get ahead of that curve? How can we get ahead of that and start advocating for solutions before problems even start to become apparent? So that takes a little bit of prognostication, a little bit of sort of fortune crystal ball reading, but I think it is well worth it for offices to think about how they can do that. So wanted to add that perspective from somebody who works in an international office in higher education, but then open it up as questions start to come in. I just want to invite the panelists to talk a little bit as a group and just talk a little bit out loud with a couple of questions before we head into Q&A with from the audience and from attendees. So one question that I'd like to just acknowledge up front is we're in a pandemic. We are all, interacting with each other in this virtual environment and connecting with each other through Zoom, through emails, through other electronic means. How has this affected your sense of how advocacy has been changed? The work that needs to be done when we are advocating for a particular set of positions or policies or people. Has it made it easier? Has it made it more difficult? In some ways, you can connect to other people much more quickly if you're on Zoom rather than having to arrange an in-person appointment. But wanted to just open it up and get your thoughts about how the pandemic and how this electronic environment has affected Zoom, has affected advocacy work.
Well, I can say from my perspective, there's some things I think it's made more difficult and some things it's made perhaps ironically a little bit easier because we are all working remotely at Senator Leahy's office. I think there is in some ways more access, more flow of communication and information because it really doesn't matter if a staff member is in Washington, D.C. or in Montpelier or in Burlington. We're really all communicating with each other in the exact same way. So it's much, I think we're encouraged to, and things are happening so quickly at this time that we need to be in touch with each other on a regular basis. And so the flow of communication, I think, is just quite extraordinary. And the technological tools are there to kind of assist with that, which certainly serves the advocacy role because we're quickly finding out about things that are taking place in Washington, D.C. or vice versa, Vermont, and sharing the information back and forth with colleagues, which I think is really serving constituents incredibly well. On the challenging side, I would say, and again, like kind of on the caseworker side, that someone may call the office with one concern or issue. They haven't heard back concerning a visa interview, in Nairobi, Kenya. Well, the problem really is that the embassy is not even, either open or all services have been suspended because of the pandemic. So it's a much larger problem. Or they may be calling because they have a concern about getting a visa, but really they also can't travel because of the geographical presidential proclamation issues or, another factor related to, or they can't cross the border. They can get to Canada from another country, but then they can't cross the border from Canada to the United States because of border restrictions. So I find when I'm doing casework with people now, it's very multi-layered and we're kind of having to take each issue one at a time. And the overlap is sometimes, I think, extremely overwhelming for people, and the challenges are just enormous. The delays are painfully long. And so it's, I'm seeing the impact on families who have been waiting years and have to wait, further years. And of course, as we all know, with refugees, the number that are allowed to come into the country is so low. So the time frame is just painfully long. So I think there's some bright lights or silver linings, if you will, and then quite a lot of challenges that I'm seeing people face because of the pandemic and the political climate as well.
For me, I think, Andrew, the anxiety level is up, right? But but where our ability as professionals to shape the conversation has also increased, because really the NAFSAs, you are all the content experts, and with in partnership with NAFSA that's providing, the polished talking points. It's a feedback loop, right? We're pushing information up. They're kind of packaging it nicely for us, and then we're pushing it back down and then pushing it out to partners on campus, to individuals. And I think, the pandemic has allowed for that streamlining of the conversation, but I think success is really trying to figure out how to harness, the power of our message and how to put it out in a way that's going to bring down anxiety level and actually make a difference. And depending on, depending on your role on campus, or depending on your area, your niche. I mean, there's many different kinds of things that one could do, writing comments if your institution allows, or as a person, asking for meetings, even for me. And I give you an example. We've have an RMV issue pretty, with, in Massachusetts and other New England states, it's always the perennial issue with RMV. And over the last 6 months, I've developed a more robust relationship with even my state rep and state senator. And I've been on their tail constantly with any issues about RMV. And they're like, I don't understand what this issue is. Can you explain it? And I, again, go back to my NAFSA folks and say, help me articulate this. And, a feedback loop, go to the region, get the advice from the experts. You are all the experts. There's the content. We're shaping the conversation. And that can be directly with legislators, that can be on campus, and that can even be out in the public domain. And this is my final thought on that. There's this idea you hear out in the marketplace of ideas like globalism is bad, right? So it used to be diversity was good. So, and we also have the power to shape that conversation, even in our day-to-day interactions with our neighbors, our family, our friends. And another example of this economic tool that NAFSA has put up, it's been up there for many, a while. And it's interesting now because I'm starting to see it quoted in a lot of articles. But it's been there for a couple of years. So it's not, these things don't happen overnight. It takes time. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing that tool quoted in all kinds of, media outlets, which is fantastic. But it took a while. I mean, we were all pushing this out. It took a while for that traction to build. So it's also a slow roll. It's not something that's, you have to, if you want to be an advocate and stay involved in advocacy, it's a building blocks, and it takes time. But there are good, there are good things that are happening out there, even in this time.
Yeah. And thanks so much, Erica. So, we do read your emails, we see the communications, but, understanding that anxiety is high. Also, the number of, emails people get on a daily basis is high. How is NAFSA, how are you thinking about, encouraging people, as Liz just said, there are building blocks. It takes time. Sometimes it just takes baby steps to advocate in a particular area or a particular issue. What's NAFSA's approach to this?
Yeah, no, that's great framing, Andy. One of the analogies that we long turned to at NAFSA was describing advocacy as a marathon, not a sprint. And that's absolutely true. But I will say, as someone who has struggled with shin splints her whole life, there is no way I'm running a marathon. And so the analogy that I actually rely on is the idea of a relay race. I can handle a relay race. Like, I know that my voice matters, and I'm committed to trying my darndest, but I also have to believe in the strength in numbers and the solidarity and support of my fellow international education enthusiasts is a really powerful force. And I can do what I can, and then I can hand that baton onto someone else and feel uplifted and energized by being a part of a greater whole that isn't solely laying on my shoulders. So I would definitely encourage you to internalize that idea, because yes, the needs are great. Anxiety is high. I mean, I don't have to tell you, international education revolves around this idea of connectivity across borders, and that's really challenged right now. But I will say also, sort of on the pragmatic side, this virtual only shift has meant that we've actually been getting great responses from staffers on Capitol Hill. I think their schedules are somewhat streamlined now. Their bosses are not necessarily jetting all over the country the way they once did. And we've been really pleased to see that we are breaking through to staffers, and they really are becoming, I think, more familiar and trustworthy of NAFSA advocates on these issues. And in a sense, because this administration is so flagrantly anti-immigration, we don't have to convince anyone right now that our issues are important. It's in the news on a daily basis, the attacks that are raining down, especially on international students right now. This is shaping up to be the year without study abroad. I mean, the relevance of our issues is painfully on display right now. And I would also say that, you know, Advocacy Day has been something that NAFSA has turned to, I think, since 2006 as a way to build the capacity of NAFSANs to be advocates. But of course, there are barriers to participating in that annual event. You need to get on a plane, you need to have the budget to pay for the registration fees and the hotel in a city like Washington, D.C. And it's a phenomenal experience from all accounts. It is well worth every penny. But the reality is we're going to a virtual only format this spring. Mark your calendars, April 21. We haven't released the exact dates yet, but that's coming. And we can expand our training now to a much broader pool of advocates. So we're going to grow in numbers simply because we now have more portability in our training, and that's really exciting. And the other thing I would just add, yes, it's hard to break through the noise, but we did it with the aforementioned student ban. We pushed back on that SEVP guidance and we won. And that had everything to do with voices like, you know, you folks, as well as a coalition with higher ed institutions, the tech industry. You know, we can do hard things. So, and we'll need to continue to try.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. There are a few questions in the chat room, and I think I'm going to ask Susanna to help us identify them. And so if we can have Susanna read out some of the questions that have come in.
Sure. I have a question about using the NAFSA International Student Economic Tool. I think that's one argument that's getting used as we prepare comment letters for the duration of status rule. Erica, I'm not sure if you could provide some context there. I'm just wondering where those numbers come from and a little bit more about the tool. And I put the link to the tool in the chat for those who are not familiar at all with it.
Great. So yes, this, as Liz mentioned, is an annual compilation of economic value data associated with the presence of international students on US campuses. And it is refreshed every year. Mark your calendars, November 16th, this year's International Education Week will again feature the release of new updated information. And it's really worth checking out the website. It allows you to customize the data for your state and your congressional district. So that, you know, to Andy's point about data, that is a wonderful resource in really putting into specific concrete numbers what international students mean in your state or congressional district. And just a note on that, I know it feels perhaps uncomfortable to keep hammering home on just the financial benefit that international students bring, because we all know it's so much more than that. But as Liz indicated with the media's interest, media eats up statistics like candy, and lawmakers really care about job creation and economic activity in their districts. It helps them get reelected to be able to talk about that kind of impact. And so while we know that there is a whole bundle of impacts that go far beyond dollars and cents, we would be hurting our case if we didn't rely on those figures, especially when we're communicating to Washington. Now, as far as the methodology, we have some language that I can find from my colleagues that speaks to the methodology. I don't unfortunately have the access to that sort of behind the scene calculations, but we'll make sure that that's shared with you all to help with those kinds of questions, Jessa. So thanks for raising that.
Great, thank you. I've got another question from Ilsa. I work in education abroad and our office works very closely with foreign consulates. My office is lucky that we have close relationships with many of them, but I know that other colleagues in education abroad aren't as connected. Any insights into how we as education abroad professionals can advocate for foreign visa support and guidance, help make it easier for students, especially during COVID. So it's great to remember this has been really focused on international student issues, but great question to think about the other side of the house and how we can advocate there.
So I don't have experience obviously in study abroad, but my experience with dealing with US embassies and consulates overseas is that relationship building. Because I you know, again, not knowing the field, I don't want to comment specifically, but I'm thinking that might be a relationship building exercise, because every single country is going to have different rules. So you have to have those relationships to be able to navigate for your students. And I'm going to go back again. I'm giving Adam Green all kinds of shout outs today, but he told me very early on in my career, every time you travel, you should make an appointment and go visit a consulate. And I started doing that in 1996. And the first consulate I visited was the US Embassy in Damascus, and made a friend with the State Department person who was then the IV section chief, and have made, connections over the years that those folks rotate, and been able to use those connections to help and support folks all along the way. So I think the relationship building in that is key, and it sounds like that's what you have done.
I'd like to follow up on that, if that's okay with what Liz just said, because I want to emphasize the relationship building part in sort of related but two kind of different settings. So one being relationship building also with your congressional offices, because certainly coming back to the caseworker side of things, a big part of what the congressional office can offer you all is the federal agency department liaisons that we have with, in this case, Department of State, USCIS, Customs and Border Protection, ICE. We don't generally directly deal with a embassy from another country, but we have in some instances, and Department of State can certainly also, through their various country desks, help us to reach another country's embassy. But also, so it's both the building the relationships with your congressional delegation, who also are building relationships with these various federal, the liaisons in these various federal agencies and departments that can then lead to contact with other embassies. And we have certainly had a number of cases, I've certainly seen a number of cases on the casework side where we've assisted students for international exchanges and helping them to reach out and connect, and particularly during the pandemic with the embassies, many of them closed or suspended, visa processing. That's been a big part of what we're doing. So I would completely want to underscore what Liz just said, the importance of building relationships, your own directly with these various embassies, as well as your relationship with your congressional delegation, who has also been building relationships with the various departments and agencies of the federal government, including embassies, which can be really helpful.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to be mindful of time. It's amazing how quickly an hour goes by, and I feel like we have so many more things that we could cover on this topic of advocacy. I do think that some of the points we've just raised about how advocacy is really an opportunity to really think about those relationships and mobilizing those relationships in different ways. Liz mentioned her mentor, Adam Green. I know throughout my career, I've relied on specific individuals to get me through difficult professional spots, help me problem solve, help me identify opportunities for creative thinking and for advancing the agenda for students and scholars. So we hope that this forum was a context for you to identify others who are possibly going to be part of your network. Include us in that. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or ideas. But now I do want to sort of give Erica just one more opportunity to plug her resources for NAFSA, and then Susanna will wrap it up after that.
Appreciate that, Andy. So duration of status, it's a big deal. I don't have to tell all of you, and it's under attack right now. The proposed DHS rule to end it is now going through its public comment period, which means now until October 26th, we can have our voice heard. Regulations.gov is the portal to do that. NAFSA has guidance on how to submit a letter, either as an individual or even better, maybe as an institution. We also have a way to inform your member of Congress about this threat and why it's so important. That's where you would turn to connectingourworld.org, and right at the home page, and I dropped the link in the chat, you will find actions to take related to duration of status. Specifically, if you are represented by a Republican in the House, there is a very time-sensitive ask, which is to get that member to sign a House Republican letter, a sign-on letter in support of duration of status and international students. So just make one little plug for that. And there's a few other resources in the chat that are relevant to the conversation that we just had. My best way to contact me is grassroots@nafsa.org. And I would love to hear from you if you had questions we didn't get to specifically related to taking action with NAFSA. And I would love to see as many of you as possible this spring, but it's a year-round game, as Andy said. So let's keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.
And can I just add one quick point that I know Senator Leahy just signed on to 2 days ago, a letter with other senators requesting to extend the comment period from 30 to 60 days. You may have seen that. That's in the materials that will be distributed to you. I think it's a very dynamic situation now, and I'm understanding there may be other efforts on the part of the Congress to really address this issue of concern. So just wanted to let you know that that's out there. Obviously, you can't count on it because the comment period currently is the 30 days, but there is a push amongst many Congress members, including Senator Leahy, to extend that, and criticizing, of course, the substantive rule itself.
Great. Well, I want to thank Andrew for moderating an excellent discussion. Thank you so much to all our panelists. I hope you all feel as inspired and refreshed as I do. I really needed this session. Personally, it's challenging times, but we're in this together. Just wanted to plug a few final conference sessions coming up. On October 28th, we have a study abroad student leadership pandemic edition session. So the link for registration will be coming out for that in the amazing emails that Molly sends out on Fridays. And then I hope you can join us for our closing ceremony and awards on October 29th. That will just wrap up the conference. We'll get to acknowledge some fantastic colleagues who will be getting awards, and we will be raffling off some digital state gift baskets. So hope to see you all there. That's just about it. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.